I'm Tim Ventura from AmericanAntiGravity.com, and I'm speaking today with Dr. Ben Bova, world-renowned science fiction writer and author of over 100 books. Now, Ben, can you tell us a little bit about your latest projects, your latest book, and how it relates to work you've done in the past?
Well, for the past 15, 16 years, I've been working on a series of novels that my fans have titled Bova's Grand Tour of the Solar System. I'm trying to show how the human race could expand through the solar system during this century. And I've done books about Mars, building the first cities on the moon, exploring Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, and my latest project is Mercury.
Now, is this the Grand Tour series that I saw
Yes.
on
Yes.
your website? And that the website again is benbova.net. Well, one of the questions I was hoping to ask was the science fiction of today often becomes the science fact of tomorrow. I guess the example that comes to mind is Arthur C. Clarke's communication satellite, which was an early example of this. But I was wondering what some of your top picks might be for science fiction that might later prove to be factual.
Well, I've always thought that I'm not writing science fiction. I'm writing historical novels that haven't happened yet, but some of them have happened. Take my novel Millennium, for example, which was published in 1976. The crux of that novel was that once you can build a defense against ballistic missiles, the back of the Cold War will be broken. And that's pretty much what happened.
Okay.
If you're looking for science fiction predictions, just look at the world around you. Everything from antibiotics to computers to space exploration to nuclear energy has all been handled in science fiction stories 50 years before they became reality. Population pressures, terrorism, all of the problems that we see today and all of the opportunities have been explored in science fiction. I think of science fiction as a simulations laboratory where you can take a peek at a possible future and see what it might be like.
That makes a lot of sense. Although one of the things I've noticed has been, for instance, Star Trek, which I know started out more of a space western approach than anything else. A lot of Star Trek fans have complained they're not seeing the Star Trek, ideas coming into the commercial marketplace. And so I guess part of science fiction is having kind of a sixth sense about when things will become real, what the timeline is.
Well, if they mean interstellar flight and antimatter propulsion, you just have to be patient. These things will happen. I have a friend who's working at Los Alamos Research Laboratory right now who produces antimatter for a living and is looking at ways of using it not just for propulsion, but more immediately for medical purposes here on Earth.
I should ask about The Silent War, which was, I believe, your newest book that just came out in September, October.
Yes.
That book describes the future of asteroid mining in the solar system, and I was wondering on, what your thoughts might be for a time frame and how asteroid mining might affect our economy once it becomes practical.
Well, The Silent War is the third of the third novel in what I've called the Asteroid Wars group. This is sort of a subset within the Grand Tour itself. The asteroids are incredibly rich in metals and minerals. They are the bonanza, the gold mine of the latter half of the 20th century. There is enough wealth in the terms of raw materials, resources, to make every human being on Earth a multimillionaire. And the only question really is who's going to do it and how is that wealth going to be shared. And that is largely what the Asteroid Wars is all about. Who goes there and who gets to share the wealth?
One of the depictions in lots of science fiction has been that once space becomes the new frontier, it'll be almost kind of like a frontier town. Again, the space western comparison comes to mind. But do you think that once asteroid mining becomes large-scale operation, that it will quite literally use anybody it can get its hands on to do the mining, or will it still be very specialized, highly trained skill, comparable with what NASA trains astronauts for today?
I think it'll be somewhere in between, but leaning toward the highly trained skills. You're going to be operating in an unearthly environment. You're going to need a technical knowledge, if not a technical education, to operate the machinery and to keep yourself alive. It's sort of like the crew of a submarine. You know, even the lowliest sailor can make a glitch that will sink the sub and kill everybody. So it won't just be saddle bums drifting through the frontier. These will be rather, compared to today, rather well-educated and highly motivated people.
Absolutely. Well, in addition to this book, a lot of your work focuses on mankind's future expansion, and something you had just described earlier. How do you visualize this happening, especially in terms of timelines? Do you think it'll be immediate? Once it happens, that's it, and it becomes very rapid, or will it be a very gradual process?
I think it will be rapid in near space, as far as the moon and perhaps the nearer asteroids are concerned. I think we're going to see the frontier leap from the Earth-Moon system out to the asteroid belt. Planets like Mars and Jupiter will have very little economic value. They're mainly of interest to the scientists who want to find out how the universe works. Even the moon, some of the early applications of the moon will be for scientific research. Makes a wonderful base for astronomical studies, for example. So we'll have commercial operations on the moon and in the space between the Earth and the moon, what is called cislunar space. And I think we'll see commercial operations with asteroids, using asteroids as resources. The near-Earth asteroids possibly, but certainly going out to the belt, which all hinges on better transportation. In my novels, I have the asteroids opening up once we have developed a good fusion drive that can get you to the asteroid belt in a matter of days instead of months.
Well, in addition to the fusion drive, though, there are a lot of other things that go into designing kind of a long-haul space transport, and a lot of those are life support systems. I guess submarines might be an early example of that, but do you think that it can be improved to the point where it'll work for months on end in space?
Yes, I think so. We'll be building habitats between the Earth and Moon that will be permanent habitats for large numbers of people. By large, I mean thousands, perhaps millions of people living in artificial habitats built in empty space between the Earth and Moon. These habitats will also be capable of being moved to other places. Like in my novel Saturn, I have 10,000 people more or less exiled from Earth, sent out to Saturn to support a scientific investigation of that planet. And actually these people are really exiled from Earth by their various governments because they're dissidents, they're troublemakers.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and I guess as a comparison with Western civilization, it has always been kind of the, well, for lack of a better word, social rejects are always pushed out to the frontier. Maybe because they can't fit well with society, but so perhaps that'll occur to some degree in space also.
Yes, I think the other thing that is happening is that the trends here on Earth, there are two major trends that I use in the Grand Tour series. The two trends on Earth, one is a sudden and disastrous shift of the climate, what I call the greenhouse cliff, which is looking more and more real among actual climatologists. And the other is the shift politically toward very authoritarian and restrictive religion-based regimes, not just in the world of Islam, but in Europe and America as well.
It's an interesting perspective. I actually just read a report that the Pentagon put together last year. They released it publicly, but it was just hard to find. And it was kind of strange, I guess, to read about climate shift. And they were talking about ice ages, and I guess the end-all be-all of it was they claimed that another will happen, quote-unquote, sooner or later. So, so I guess...
There's a very good article in this month's Scientific American about climate shifts. And the ironic thing is that a greenhouse warming could very well lead to a new ice age. It sounds silly at first, but once you get into the mechanics of the climate shift, you can see how a sudden warming of the planet will inevitably lead to a new ice age.
One of the things that I believe I'd asked you about in the past, and it keeps coming to mind because I go to the Ray Kurzweil website fairly often, but Werner Vinge has been describing a technological singularity, and he believes it results from an increasing rate of technological development. And according to him, it makes the sci-fi writer's predictions less accurate and harder to make as time goes by. Um, has this been a struggle at all in your writing? That technology catches up?
No, I guess I'm not as smart as Werner, so I just trundle along in my own aimless way. I do see lots of technological change, but I think every generation tends to think that this is the focus of history, that what's happening now has never happened before. But if you really look back at history, you'll see there have been eras of enormous change, and the human race has muddled through them one way or another. Today, I think we are on the brink of expanding into space in a major way, because the first little steps of commercial space operations are beginning to take place. You've had Burt Rutan win the XPrize, by flying his Spaceship One. Once people begin to realize they can make money in space, then the pace of development will go much, much faster. Unfortunately, the scientific exploration of space will still be at the mercy of the people who donate to scientific research. And this means either large philanthropists or large governments. And that will still be very much at the whim of political winds of change. But the commercial development, the idea of building large structures in space, perhaps solar power satellites, which is the subject actually of a book of mine coming out in February. This will happen much faster than we've been going in the past.
Speaking of ideas, I guess, of the, our time, quote unquote, being the focus of history, or at least perceptually speaking, do you have any thoughts on nanotech or sentient / artificial intelligent computer systems? Do you think we'll see these in the 21st century, or will they be farther out, perhaps?
Oh, we already have nanotech working inside our bodies. We call them cells. Nanotechnology is a wonderful tool, especially for novelists, because you can use it almost like a magic wand. You can make it do what you want and say, okay, well, we have nanomachines that'll do that. So you have to be very careful about understanding how it really works and what it can and cannot accomplish. In some of the Grand Tour novels, I've had nanomachines used as murder weapons. I've also had them building spacecraft out of carbon dust and making diamond-like structures for spacecraft hulls.
I believe that Drexler had talked about doing diamond engine nacelles in Engines of Creation at one point.
Yes.
So definitely an interesting and innovative
There are many
technology.
other things that can be done. I have a high-tech thriller coming out in February called PowerSat. And it's about actually one of the characters in the Grand Tour, Dan Randolph. It talks about his early life and his attempts to build the first major solar power satellite. There's no nanotech in that. I think that would be beyond the audience that this book is aimed for. But nanomachines would certainly make life a lot easier.
Most definitely. And, in the harsh environment of space, I think it adds yet another technology that people can use for, long-term sustainability. Since the last time we spoke, about a year ago, the XPrize competition has finally been won, or at least the first round, by Burt Rutan's team. And I was wondering if you might see any immediate impacts coming from that in the near future.
It's already had an immediate impact. We've had this guy Branscombe from Virgin Airways who wants to start a space line, and he's willing to put up tens of millions of dollars to start a tourist operation. Will take people into suborbital space, and eventually I think this will grow into facilities in orbit for people to stay there, as tourists at prices that wealthy people can afford. It's no longer $20 million to take a ride on a Russian spacecraft up to the International Space Station. It's down to $100,000 to go into space. That's a big jump.
Yeah,
And it's going to jump even more.
it definitely makes it more achievable. Well, on the
Well, you know, I've
subject,
had a character named Sam Gunn who had this great idea for a honeymoon hotel in Earth orbit, and he even had a motto for it. You know, if you like waterbeds, you're going to love zero G.
on the subject of actually getting into space, we discussed Orion ships and Lightcraft in the past.
Hmm.
And, these are both, I guess, possible for heavy lift, but they both have some danger. With an Orion ship, there's the danger of, using nuclear bombs to accelerate it. And with a Lightcraft, if you miss with the orbital laser, you could have some real problems. You think that either of these will kind of get renewed interest in the near future?
I don't think the idea of using orbital bombs as a pulse jet is going to get a lot of support. I think there are just too many political ramifications. Using lasers from the ground for boosting heavy cargoes makes a lot of sense. And the kinds of lasers that you'll need for that will make very efficient weapons, too, for shooting down ballistic missiles.
Ah, so it could almost be a dual role approach, I guess.
Yes, more than that. You know, when Rutan or someone else develops a ship that can take you conveniently and efficiently into orbit, that same vehicle would be able to fly to any spot on Earth in less than an hour from where you take off. This is a transportation market that is worth trillions of dollars, space notwithstanding.
Well,
So there are economic opportunities that I think will accelerate the development of spacecraft very, very much faster than the various government operations have in the past.
I guess that if it parallels air travel, it might be a bit like the Concorde. You'd start out with the executive class, incredibly expensive seats, and then
Well, I
gradually.
hope not, because the Concorde was a flop from the beginning, and only British and French pride kept it flying. It was an inefficient airplane. It wasn't fast enough to really make a dent in the long-range market. It didn't have the range to cross the Pacific. So it was I shouldn't say a mistake, but it was doomed to fail commercially from the very beginning. Only government subsidies kept it flying for as long as it did. The Concorde was never fast enough to really make a difference. The subsonic jets shrunk the Atlantic sufficiently for business and tourism to make that a major market. What we need now is a hypersonic jet or rocket that can shrink the Pacific enough so that major tourism and business markets will open up.
Well, I know that some experimental fuels have been tried, and if I remember right, Rutan was actually using a type of plastic, if I remember right.
Well, that sounds more like a solid rocket.
Yeah. The shuttle, I believe, still uses aluminum, doesn't it, in part of its boosters?
The solid boosters use a rubberized aluminum, yes.
Yeah. One of the things I wonder about is the price offset. Jet fuel is not easy to come by, but it's a lot more available than some of these alternative fuels.
Yeah, I think the ultimate fuel for rockets, if we're going to use chemical rockets, will be hydrogen. The space shuttle's main engines burn hydrogen and oxygen. When the shuttle takes off, you see these two big plumes of smoke from the solid boosters. You see nothing coming out of the shuttle's own engines and the tail of the shuttle. That's because what's coming out is very hot steam, and it's transparent.
Well, that would mesh well with some of the current political goals of, I know GM is working on hydrogen cars, and they're trying to get some of those economies to work. So
Yes,
that would.
and the oil interests are not looking at that with any great favor. But eventually, we will have to get off petroleum and develop other alternate fuels, and hydrogen is a good one. The question is, can you produce hydrogen efficiently and economically? It takes more energy to split hydrogen out of water than the hydrogen gives you back as a propulsion fuel. So it's a losing proposition unless you can split the hydrogen out of the water very, very cheaply.
Well, another technology, energy technology, that's had a lot of renewed interest this year is cold fusion. The DOE is supposedly releasing their final report on it at the end of this month. Any predictions for what they might find?
No, cold fusion, if you pardon the pun, leaves me cold. Um, it falls into the category of good news if true, and I need to be convinced.
Absolutely. I think a lot of other people are kind of fence sitting on the moment on that. Well, you'd mentioned a moment ago, kind of Gerard K. O'Neill style space habitats, and I'm
Yes.
wondering what the timeline might be for those.
I would think in the next 30 years.
Oh, so it's not far away then.
No, not at all. You see, we have the impression that it takes a long time to get anything done in space. That's a false impression. It takes a long time to get anything through Washington. When the government wanted to, we got to the moon in less than 10 years from a flat start. When the government wants to, we could do things that are just incredible. And now, with Rutan and these other entrepreneurs getting into space, we're going to see things moving much faster. If some entrepreneur becomes convinced he can make money in space, and if he can convince investors to put money up, you'll see things going very much quicker than they do today, where we're sort of at the mercies of the politicians. And politicians make decisions in space, about space, I should say, the way they make decisions about anything. They make them for political reasons, not for science, not for the expansion of the human race. The first thing a politician asks himself is, how will this decision affect my reelection? And that's why we don't move very quickly in space, because no politician is going to do things that look very risky and very expensive.
Absolutely. Well, would you say that, even with the political pressures and kind of I guess, the baggage that they bestow on things, do you think that space technologies are moving along at a pretty good clip, or has it been kind of slow compared to what estimates have been in science fiction?
Well, it depends on which science fiction you read, because the wonderful thing about science fiction is it's got a prediction for everything. Um, is space technology moving fast enough? Well, we're still using chemical rockets. We're still using the same kind of rockets that the British used against Fort McHenry, the same kind of rockets that Genghis Khan used as he swept across China. We need to develop better propulsion systems. In fact, in my series of novels, the Grand Tour, most of the advances that we make in space hinge on better propulsion systems that will make it cheaper and easier and safer to move into space.
Absolutely. In terms of better propulsion systems, do you think that the speed of light will ever be broken, or will we just eventually someday go around it using wormholes?
I suspect that the speed of light will never be broken, but we will find ways around it. And that's because the brightest man I ever knew felt that way, and I trust his judgment. He's the guy who helped break the sound barrier, and he pointed out some very interesting mathematical parallels between supersonic flight and superluminal flight. Once you go faster than light, you may collect energy rather than expend it.
I see what you mean. Kind of like jets heating up when they pass the sound barrier from the shockwave.
When you pass the sound barrier, when you go past Mach 1, the drag actually decreases on the aircraft. So he always felt that the light barrier, the so-called light barrier, is pretty much the same. And he did some very interesting mathematical treatments to show what would happen if you did travel faster than light. Unfortunately, the mathematics doesn't tell you how to do it.
Sure, sure. Well, one of the things that we've seen have been, and I guess this is more of a mythology type question, but we've seen these references to magic compounds, and they keep popping up from both independent inventors, just telling stories to friends, as well as kind of the UFO community. One of the big ones has been mercury, and the other is bismuth. And for whatever reason, both of these seem to be tied to anti-gravity. I was wondering why you might have a couple of compounds like this that would just have this reputation for strange effects.
Well, mercury has always been looked at with awe. It's literally a liquid metal. It's a metal that's liquid at normal terrestrial conditions. And under the right circumstances, it can climb walls. But that doesn't mean it's anti-gravity. It doesn't mean it can lift other weights in opposition to gravity. I'm sure there will be anti-gravity devices in the sense that we'll be able to lift things without the expenditure of chemical rockets. We'll find other energy sources, perhaps electromechanical or gravitational, or even using lasers, as has been proposed.
Yeah, yeah, there's certainly a lot of ideas out there. Well, I think we're almost out of time. Is there anything you'd like to say in close?
I want to emphasize the fact that it doesn't take a long time to develop new technology. That when you put your mind to it, when there is sufficient investment, whether it's investment from the government or from private sources, things can move alarmingly quickly. And I think we're on the cusp of seeing that happen in space, that private money is beginning to come in, and things are going to move a lot faster.
Okay. Well, thanks again for your time, Dr. Bova. And your website is www.benbova.net. And your books are available in Barnes & Nobles and bookstores all over the world. I
And
definitely recommend them.
Amazon.com and all the electronic stores, too.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. I sincerely appreciate this opportunity to speak with you.
My pleasure.
Thanks.